In the roaring arenas of ancient Rome, where tens of thousands screamed for blood, gladiators were treated as both heroes and slaves. They were forced to fight, not for glory, but for survival, spectacles of pain that entertained the empire. Among them were men and women whose names spread like wildfire, warriors so feared that even emperors trembled at their presence. But behind the armor and the cheers was a darker truth. Many were prisoners of war, enslaved, or condemned for their race and status. Who were the 10 most feared gladiators? And what did their suffering reveal about Rome's brutal obsession with power? Gladiators were Rome's ultimate paradox. To the masses, they were gods of the arena, symbols of strength and bravery. Yet outside the amphitheater, they were property, bought, sold, and discarded by their masters. Rome glorified their violence, but denied them humanity. Most gladiators were enslaved men captured in war, Africans, Gauls, Thracians, and others Rome labeled as outsiders. To the empire, they were barbarians. To the crowds, they were entertainment. Stripped of freedom and identity, they were thrown into the ludus, the gladiator schools, where cruelty was disguised as training. Some were forced into combat against their will. Others embraced the fight as the only path to dignity in a world that sought to erase them. The Colosseum became the stage where these men lived and died, each battle performance to remind Romans of their dominance over conquered peoples. Yet within that cruel system, legends emerged, fighters who defied the empire's script. They didn't just fight to entertain. They fought to survive, to inspire, to resist. From Spartacus, who turned his blade into rebellion, to Flamma, who rejected freedom to keep fighting, their stories echo across centuries. They were more than Rome's entertainment. They were a reflection of what happens when oppression tries to silence human spirit. And when the crowd roared, Rome didn't just cheer for blood. It cheered for control. Imagine the arena, the sand stained red, the roar of 50,000 spectators demanding death. For Rome's rulers, this was order through fear. For the gladiators, it was survival against impossible odds. Some of the most feared fighters carved their names into history, not just with swords, but with defiance. Spartacus, a Thracian enslaved and forced to fight, became more than a gladiator. He became a revolutionary. His rebellion shook the empire, reminding Rome that enslaved men, treated as less than human, could rise and fight back. To Rome, he was feared not only for his strength, but for what he represented, freedom. Then came Flamma, a Syrian gladiator who won his freedom 4 times, yet turned it down. Why? Because he knew the world outside the arena would never accept him as an equal. The only place he had power was within the sand and steel of the Colosseum. His story exposed the cruel irony of Rome. Freedom meant nothing when society was built on chains. Others like Crixus, a Gaul, and Commodus, the emperor who descended into the arena himself, blurred the line between spectacle and tyranny. Rome's elites exploited the suffering of the enslaved, but sometimes they too craved the intoxication of blood. Perhaps most haunting were the African gladiators. Their skill, strength, and resilience were celebrated in the arena, but despised outside it. To the Roman crowd, their victories were thrilling, but also a reminder of Rome's fear of the very people it enslaved. These fighters embodied the paradox. Worshipped in one moment, dehumanized in the next. The empire designed the games to crush dignity, to make suffering entertaining. But with each legend that rose, Rome's cruelty was exposed. These gladiators weren't just feared. They were proof that even in chains, the oppressed command power, and that terrified Rome far more than any sword. The climax of this story came not in a single fight, but in the way these gladiators transformed fear itself. Spartacus's rebellion was the ultimate breaking point. What began as a band of escaped gladiators grew into a force of tens of thousands, enslaved men and women who refused to bow. The Roman Senate was horrified. Here were the people they had stripped of identity, rising as an army of equals. Every victory Spartacus won shook the empire's foundations. Rome didn't just fear his sword. They feared the truth his army revealed, that their power depended on oppression, and oppression was never permanent. In the Colosseum, Flamma faced his own climax. Offered freedom again, he looked at the world Rome promised him, a world of prejudice, rejection, and poverty. He chose the arena instead, where at least his worth was undeniable. His decision was both a tragedy and a revelation. Freedom means nothing when society refuses to see you as human. For the African gladiators, their climax was every victory. Each time the crowd cheered, Rome's racial hierarchy trembled. Their existence challenged the myth of Roman superiority, forcing citizens to worship the very people their empire enslaved. That contradiction was Rome's deepest wound. And in those moments, on the battlefield, in the arena, or in rebellion, gladiators became more than entertainers. They became symbols of resistance. Their names feared not just for strength, but for the power of what they represented. The stories of Rome's most feared gladiators remind us that history often hides the voices of the oppressed. To Rome, they were weapons. To us, they are warnings. Spartacus was crucified, his rebellion crushed. Flamma died in the sand, his victories buried under Rome's pride. Countless African, Gaulish, and Thracian fighters vanished into silence, their names erased even as their blood built Rome's glory. Yet their impact endures. Rome tried to define them as slaves, criminals, outsiders. But through their courage, they forced the empire to confront its own hypocrisy. They revealed that no matter how powerful and oppressive seems, resistance is always possible. Their story is not just ancient history. It is a mirror. For centuries, societies have celebrated the labor, creativity, and strength of marginalized people while denying them humanity. The paradox of the gladiators is the same paradox of modern injustice. Praise in moments of spectacle, erased in moments of truth. When we look at Rome's arenas, we must ask, how much of today's wealth and entertainment still rests on suffering unseen? How many systems still profit from silencing the very voices that deserve to be heard? The gladiators fought for survival. Today, their legacy asks us to fight for memory, for justice, and for humanity that empire after empire has tried to erase.